Testing the DR60. Are there any ghosts here? End of session.
Testing the DR60. Are there any ghosts here? End of session.
What a piece of crap. Cue the opening. What's up there, my fellow skeptics and believers and everyone in between? Welcome back to another episode of Ghosts in the Machine. This is an episode I've been wanting to do for a long time. Because, as you guys know, if you watch this channel and you follow my writing, I was a ghost hunter. And I was a ghost hunter in the late 90s, early 2000s. And when I was a ghost hunter, one of the big things, one of the must-have pieces of equipment that came out was the Panasonic RR-DR60. It was a digital audio recorder, a dictaphone, if you will. But it came out, it was brand new. It came out in 1998, despite what some people think. It came out in 1998, and it retailed for $100. Other places, and I'll put some links up in the screen here, other places thought that it was initially sold for $30 or something like that, but it wasn't. It was actually retailed for $100, and I'll put up right here, this is from Wired magazine, and that's the initial advertisement for it, and the price, you'll see, is $99.95, I think. So I couldn't get it back then. I was still young. I didn't have a lot of money, and I couldn't afford $100 for a piece of ghost hunting equipment that I was only going to use like maybe every other weekend, maybe once a month. I couldn't justify it. Years later, I couldn't afford it because apparently it has become the holy grail of EVP research or acquisition, if you will, because people use them. Some ghost hunters, not all, thankfully, not all, but there's a good majority of ghost hunters, especially paracelebs, which are ghost hunters that are on TV. They have their own TV show. Some of them have gotten this DR60 device, and they claim that it's the best device to communicate with ghosts, where you can ask questions and you get these growling, angry either yells or answers, or these muffled growls that sound like words, especially when you prime them up on the screen, when you put the text on the screen so you know what you're supposed to be listening to. Anyway, so again, I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I haven't been able to because of the one restriction. I haven't been able to afford to get one. Nowadays, they are going for $1,000 all the way up to $3, $4, $5,000 because of the reputation they have. So it restricted me. I didn't have that much. I could have saved up if I wanted to and bought one for $1,000, but hell no, I'm not going to do that. It's $1,000 for a piece of shit recorder, as we'll see. I'll get into that a little bit later. But thankfully, I do have a friend up here. He lives in Buffalo. He's on the ghost hunting side, but he's a good friend of mine. We get to talk. We have great conversations. His name is Daniel Klaus. He runs the Hinsdale House, which is an allegedly haunted place that he has let me stay there. I've stayed there twice overnight, and I've visited once already, and I'm also gonna take my friend and fellow critical thinker Melanie Tressick King. We're gonna go in a couple weeks. We're gonna actually stay the night there on a ghost hunt. But I reached out to Daniel, and he was kind enough to let me borrow his. So I have one now, and I can test it. I can play with it. I can do some recordings and really get into the nitty gritty. So let's get into it. All right, so what's the big deal with this thing? Why are power celebrities showing it on TV shows? Why are a lot of ghost hunters saying that this is the holy grail? You saw before the intro, I did a little clip where I asked for any ghosts, and you heard like this growl noise, and that's the typical response. We get growls, loud growls that sounds like somebody's like rawr, something like that. But we also get very subtle ones. There's very subtle noises that also sound like growls, but when you're listening for something specific, like in the context of are there any ghosts here? What's your name? These kind of questions that we see in ghost hunting shows and on ghost investigations where people gather around. They're called EVP sessions. And they're asking these type of questions. And when they listen to this and they get these little growls, even the subtle ones, it sounds like a response. Actually, I mean, some of the recordings that I have with this, it actually sounds like someone's talking in the background. Is it? No, we'll get to that later. But I just want to give you some more demonstrations, a couple more clips, maybe 2 or 3 more clips, because I don't want to go too long with this, but show you that in different spaces, in different areas, we can get the same thing. We can establish there's a pattern here of this recorder creating these kind of noises. So here we go. I'm going to put this down here. I'm going to hit record, and I'm going to ask the same question, and we're going to see what do we get. Testing in the seminar room. We're looking for ghosts. I'm going to put this down and say, hey, any ghosts here? All right, that should do it. End of session. Let's hear. I'm going to put it up to the microphone here.
Testing in the seminar room. We're looking for ghosts. I'm going to put this down and say, hey, any ghosts here? All right, that should do it. End of session.
That's pretty much like the opening one. That's pretty cool. There we go. Let's go to another location. All right, so now I'm home. I'm in my house, and there's never been any reported activity here. There's no ghost stories. There's nothing. I'm pretty confident that this place is not haunted whatsoever. So I'm going to try it again. I'm going to see what happens when we record with this. Here we go. Put it down. Recording at my home. And are there any ghosts here? All right, that'll be end of session. All right, I'm going to hold it up here so you guys can hear it better because I don't have my lapel mic on this time.
Recording at my home, and are there any ghosts here? All right, that'll be end of session.
So there were very subtle noises, much like what we've been hearing, like the outbursts, but they were lower in volume, but still there. And that's another thing that we get. We get the loud outburst and we get the subtle outburst, which is creating a pattern here. So let's go one more time. All right, I'm down in the CFI libraries where no human being would stack books like that. Wink, wink. Anyway, so I got the recorder, the DR60 here. I'm going to do a final attempt here and see if we can get some ghosts to answer us. All right, here we go. Click and record now. Testing in the CFI libraries. Are there any ghosts down here? I'm going to put it down so I'm not touching it. All right, with that, end of session. All right, whew.
Let's listen.
Testing in the CFI libraries. Are there any ghosts down here? Down? Touch it. All right, that end of session.
Okay, still found some. Interesting. So, let's talk about this.
All right, so what was the point? Why did I make you guys watch video of me sitting in different places, recording with this and recording allegedly nothing, but then hearing voices? It was to establish a pattern. That was my point, to show you, like, no matter where I go, in the CFI offices here in Buffalo, New York, where it is definitely not haunted. There's nothing going on here. And I still get these noises, these alleged EVP voices. In my home, my own home, I get the same thing. No matter where I go, 36 recordings I have on here. You can see on the front here. 36 recordings, all of the same thing in different spots, different areas. And I'm getting the same thing. This is a pattern. And it doesn't mean that a place is haunted. It means there's something going on with this right here. So let's get into some of the I guess, the science behind some of this stuff. All right, so the first thing I want to establish is just the basic hearing range. And I mean, you can look this up, it's not a big deal, but the average human can hear frequencies, sound frequencies, from 20,000 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And that's generally, that's about people that are like in their 20s and 30s. I mean, that's the range that you can hear. And as you age, your hearing declines. And I mean, for people that are around 40 years old, you might hear up to about 15,000 hertz. I just wanted to get that out there and establish it because we're looking at what kind of frequency response does this thing have? What can it record? What can it produce? And it's important to know the basics of what we're doing, because this is not a high quality recorder. It was never meant to be. It was meant to be a dictaphone. That's it, for taking notes, dictation. That's what it was for. So you could sit here if you're in a business meeting, or if you're if you have to have notes typed up, or you're reading something and you want to talk out some notes, you can turn this on and speak and say, all right, I need to remember this, I need to do that, or you dictate a certain thing and then have somebody else type it up. That's the purpose of this. It was only supposed to record your voice in a fair quality way. It was not supposed to be an exact reproduction, anything like that. We had to remember that. So there are two specifications that we really have to look at when we're looking at the quality of the audio coming from devices like this, compared to other and more modern recorders. And the two things are frequency response and sampling rate. So frequency response, basically, as it says on the screen here, describes the range of frequencies or musical tones a component can reproduce. So that's saying, hey, what frequencies can this thing reproduce when we're listening to it? So the other specification that we have to look for is sample rate. And I'm going to throw this up on screen. This is from Audacity. And from my experience, a lot of paranormal believers have used or still use Audacity as a editing software for when they get these audio recordings. So going right to the website, you can see here that it says sample rate is the number of samples of audio carried per second, measured in hertz or kilohertz. For example, 44,100 samples per second can be expressed as either 44.100 hertz or 44.1 kilohertz. And that's actually a standard for CD quality. And if we look a little further down on this page, it says the sample rate determines the maximum audio frequency that can be reproduced. Theoretically, the maximum frequency that can be represented is half the sample rate, known as the Nyquist frequency. Look that up. It's a pretty cool thing. So in simple terms, if you want to reproduce, that means it comes out of the speaker. When you play it, you hear it. If you want to reproduce a frequency just like we hear it, then you have to record the frequency at twice the frequency. So let's break it down even further. If you're trying to record something, a sound at 10,000 hertz, you want to record it at least 20,000 hertz. That's how many samples you have to take. 20,000 samples per second in order to record a frequency of 10,000 hertz. That's as simple as I can do it. And because of the Nyquist frequency or theorem, however it's referred to, these two, sample rate and frequency response, which we just talked about, are linked. And we know that if we have a sample rate, we know the highest frequency that it can reproduce. And when it comes to the DR60, this guy, that was a big problem at first because we didn't know. The manual, which I'll throw up here. I'll throw up on here. Yeah. The manual doesn't list the specifications. It doesn't list the frequency response. It doesn't list the sample rate. And we didn't know. We have no idea. It was only later models that show up. Like the model that I have. Hold on. This guy, the QR80. This was released 1 year after the DR60. So I got this one because it was cheaper, I think. This was back in my ghost hunting days, so I didn't have a lot of money, so I did get this one, and this was, again, released in 99, and then the owner's manual for this did list the frequency response, and that listed, which you'll see here, is 450 to 5 kilohertz, which is pretty crappy. I mean, honestly, let's look at the Audacity website again. So when we look at what's listed for a sample rate of 11,025 hertz, it says gives very poor sound quality. And remember, we're below that. We're at 10. So we're below. When we get down to 8,000 hertz sample rate, it says it has less bandwidth than modern telephone systems. 8 kilohertz sample rate is thus not suitable for any serious recording task, though it may be adequate for some sound effects or recording infrasound. We're not getting into infrasound here because you're not going to hear it anyway. So even if it did record that and was able to reproduce it, you would not hear it. So we're not even going to touch that. All right, I know that we're doing a lot of technical stuff here, a lot of numbers and stuff like that. So hopefully you haven't fallen asleep yet. I'm trying to get to the point, but it takes a little bit. There's a lot of backstory here. So I'm jumping back in. I want to compare the both because even though we know the more modern one, the QR80, which was a year after the original DR60 one, even though we know the frequency response and the sample rate for this was a year later. So it's a newer model and it's different. And when you compare the two audio samples, there's definitely a difference in sound quality. So I didn't think the numbers could be used from this one, the more modern one, to the older one. So listen right here.
How old are you? Have you ever lived in this house?
How old are you? Have you ever lived in this house?
These are fed directly into my sound system here. I'm not playing it on the microphone. It's actually plugged in to my soundboard. So you can hear that there's definitely a difference. There's a little bit better sound quality in the newer model than the older model. So that got me digging more. And I came up with, I found an article on Higgy Pop that actually went into, Higgy Pop is a website, and it went into this recorder and how bad it was. And honestly, it was a pretty good article. It wasn't bad at all. I mean, I enjoyed it. Except it got to the point where it was trying to look at sample rate, and it was relying more on stories or hearsay, and it made a mistake. It said that it was the sample rate was only 6 times per second, which is not correct at all. It's actually what was thought was 6 kilohertz, so 6,000 times per second. And this was just, as far as we knew, it was hearsay. We didn't have anything. The manual didn't say it. We couldn't find any documentation. They reached out to Panasonic. They couldn't get any answers. I reached out to Panasonic, and actually I got this, which tells me basically they didn't have any records. Panasonic didn't have any records of any of these recorders anymore. They're just gone. So they couldn't give me any information. So I reached out to a few friends of mine, And I talked to Mitch Silverstein, which is a good friend of mine, and we were talking about it, and he was actually able to locate a service manual for the original DR60, and it listed sample rate, which made me happy, because I actually had, this was in print, it was used for Panasonic, it was by Panasonic, so I had official documentation saying that the sample rate was 6 kilohertz. So that's below the 10 kilohertz that we had on the newer model. So that's even worse. That's so bad, because when you think about it, now that's 6 kilohertz sample rate is only allowing it to reproduce frequencies up to 3,000 hertz, so 3 kilohertz. And to put that in perspective, the telephone system, the National American Telephone System, or I'm sorry, I made a mistake, North American Public Switched Telephone Network, that's the official name, has a frequency response of 300 hertz to 3,400 hertz, which translates to a sample rate of 6.8 kilohertz. So the old phone system, you guys remember this? Hello? That means that the old phone system had better frequency response, could produce better sound quality than this thing that ghost hunters use. Let that sink in. That puts it in perspective of the very poor quality of this recorder. And I really want to establish that. I'm trying to hit that home, like really pound that into place, because so many people think this is a great recorder, and it's actually a piece of shit. And that's why it's not sold anymore. It just didn't do good. A year later, they put out a new model and got rid of this. They just didn't put this in. There was no recall. There was rumors about recalls, and because Panasonic knew it was picking up spirit voices. Seriously, that was a thing. That didn't happen. And actually, the article I mentioned from Higgy Pop. Let me make sure I get that right. When they contacted Panasonic, they went into the recall myth, and Panasonic denied it. Said nope, it was out of production. That's it. All right, so we have established that this is a very poor quality recorder. Very, very, very poor quality recorder, and it's not useful for anything other than dictating notes. That's it, so that you can listen to them later and type them if you want to. But why are we getting these voices? Why are we hearing growling noises, either subtle or really loud outbursts like this? Like, where are they coming from? Where are these noises coming from? So this made me go into a little bit deeper. I came across a gentleman named Dr. John P. Costella, and I tried to reach out to him. I did reach out to him, but I could not get connected. He's got some privacy barriers up. I just couldn't get a hold of him. If you're watching this, Dr. Costella, please contact me. I'd love to talk to you a little bit further, because he put out this amazing analysis of the DR60. He really went into it. He is a very smart guy. He's a data scientist. Works in DC. He has a bachelor's in electronic engineering. Graduated top of his class. He's got a PhD in theoretical particle physics. Smart. And he's done a lot of work. There's a lot. If you look on his LinkedIn page, the guy's smart. He knows what he's talking about. But he did a breakdown of this recording because he went on a ghost hunt. He went on I think a ghost tour in 2022. And with his wife around the DC area, and they got exposed to a team using these. So he got interested, and he set up some tests, trying to test some hypotheses. He believed that there's a couple things here. I'm going to read them off here because they're interesting, and I think they are. I'm going to put the link in the video on the bottom here, so you can go to it yourself. But he believed that there were 4 things that could possibly be going on here. One is that the DR60 software had bugs in it, resulting in it making up sounds that never entered the microphone. Number 2 is the DR60 was not filtering out high frequency or ultrasonic sounds, and these were being aliased down to normal voice frequencies. We'll come back to that. Number 3 was the DR60's electronic circuits were picking up electromagnetic interference, effectively converting the induced currents into sound signals. And number 4, paranormal phenomena were able to rewrite the bits and bytes in the digital storage of the DR60, implanting sound messages there directly. So it's a couple pages long. I'm not going to go into everything. But he did do some testing. He got some equipment. Let's see, because this is important too. He was able to get a Peterson U384 microphone, which it could record frequencies from 384 kilohertz, which is well above what we need, all the way down to 1 kilohertz. And then he also got a Panasonic ultrasonic mic tester, which generates test ultrasound sequences between 14 kilohertz and 125 kilohertz. He ordered both of those. He had those. He also, ironically, he used Audacity to handle all the audio samples, which is great because that's what we sampled from the information from earlier. The only thing he couldn't get his hands on was a DR60 because they were running about $1,000. But he went through several ideas. He went through finding the service manual, part of the service manual that I found. And going through that, he found some things that were important, very important. And basically what he found through the service manual, and I was able to verify this, which is really cool. I understood it, especially after reading his analysis, was that when it's inputting sound, when sound is coming in through the microphone, it looks at it and says, okay, well, it compares the sound frequencies in 5 millisecond packets. It compares it to a data bank that it has, which it calls a code bank in the manual here. And it looks for a similar pattern, a similar frequency pattern. And I'll show it on screen. This is what it looks like. So you know you can follow along. And basically what it does is selects the most similar pattern and then stores that in its memory. And then when it's ready to play back, it retrieves it from the memory. It again matches it up to the code bank and looks at the code number that most closely matches it and then plays it out. It outputs it. The problem is that further along in the manual, when you read about recording, it saves everything to memory in 1 second blocks. So because it's voice activated, it might only record like a quarter of a second or half a second, but it can't save that as a quarter of a second or a half a second. It has to save it as a full second. So it adds on. There's signal that's placed there, which changes the pattern. You have to understand that it changes the pattern now that it's looking at and comparing with in its code bank. So not only do we have extra data that doesn't belong there, but we also have a bad sample rate that is causing aliasing, which screws up the signal even more, and it's creating a different pattern so that when you play back, you're not hearing anywhere near the same sound that you recorded. With that said, when you're using this recorder, you can only use it in voice activation mode. You can't turn it off. That's a big problem. That's a big problem because it's always starting and stopping, starting and stopping. So once you hit record, it'll start recording, but if there's no sound, it'll stop. But it depends on the microphone sensitivity. There's 5 levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Literally, that's what's in the settings. And when you're on sensitivity level 1 and 2, that's when it's the most active. That's when, like when I sat this down during the examples, when I put it on the table and just walked away. At one point, I literally walked away for a half hour, and I left it in a seminar room outside my office here for a half hour, and it recorded 12 minutes of audio, and I was like, holy crap. And when you listen to it, it's nothing but those growling sounds all the way through. And it was completely quiet. Well, not completely quiet. I mean, it was quiet. But this is something we have to consider. Higher sensitivity levels like 3, 4, and 5. 3, it did occasionally, did the same thing. But 4 and 5, I didn't hear it at all. But that's the problem. the starting and stopping when it's on this very high sensitivity, it's recording these fraction of a second spaces where there's really no noise. It's ambient noise. That's all it is. It's ambient noise. But it's still going through the code bank, and it's being stored in memory. It's stitching together with other sounds. It's stitching all of these little clips together, and then it's saving it in the memory as a pattern. And then when it outputs, it looks at that pattern again and puts out a signal, an audio signal that matches a pattern in its code bank, which turns out to be these growling noises. And this is something that we can repeat. We can repeat it over and over again. Now I'm up to, I have 44 recordings on here now of just letting it sit, doing nothing, putting it on a table, putting it out there, sitting next to it, sitting across the room from it with no noise, and I'm getting the same thing over and over again. And you know what's interesting is that when I read the report from Dr. Casello, his analysis of it, he was able to not acquire recorders, but he was able to meet up with another ghost hunting team that had 2 of these together. And when they recorded together, he found that they recorded different growls. So both recorders right next to each other recording didn't record the same audio track. They had the same kind of growls, similar growls, up and down, loud and soft, but it wasn't consistent. And I mean, he concluded, basically, let me read this for you. The EVPs picked up by the DR60 are not measurements of a physical phenomenon, since any such physical phenomenon should affect 2 DR60s equally, whether through option 2 or option 3 above, or indeed any other physical explanation that I hadn't thought of. He's right. I agree with him. Two of these should pick up the same sounds. When they don't, it's telling me that it's an internal problem. It's a problem with the recorder itself. And finally, Dr. Casello concluded that the root cause is most likely the software controlling the voice activation system. Recall that the voice activation needs to stitch together stored pieces of audio, and that this storage of data occurs in 1-second chunks. If there was some software bug that doesn't properly handle this stitching, say by including random data from the rest of the second, then the CELP compression method used in this recorder will take that random data and turn it into something that sounds somewhat like speech. Yeah. So, in the end, to sum all this up, I don't think this is a ghost communicator at all. I think this was Panasonic's first attempt at a digital recorder, and with the technology available at the time, what they put out, something that was kind of reasonably priced. You know, $100 was still a lot for 1998. And then it was just a poor quality recorder. When you look at like Sony Mavica, which was the first consumer digital camera available to us, that was also a piece of crap. That was really, really bad. But we enjoyed it. We loved it. And things grew. It evolved. Digital cameras evolved to the quality that we have now, which is beyond what film is. So I think it's the same issue with this. This was the first attempt, and it came out, and it was really crappy, but digital recorders, audio recorders, have evolved since then and become much, much, much better. But at the time, it fell into this idea where ghost hunters were just adopting different technologies, different gadgets in order to prove the existence of ghosts. But what they were doing, and myself included, because I was a ghost hunter at the time when this came out, we were looking at anomalies. We were looking at something that was strange, that didn't fit, that we could not explain, and we immediately equated it to, oh, this must be ghosts. That's the way it was, and I did the same thing, to be honest, until I understood things better, until I started really learning about technology. When I learned, not only learned more, but investigated and found clues and figured out what was really going on. But unfortunately, I think there's a group of people that will stick with this belief. They will believe that this is communicating with ghosts, even though we get the same staticky noises time and time and time and time again. I'm up to, what am I at, 65 recordings now. And these all are the same thing, just sitting here at the desk, at home. I went to the supermarket for one and just played it in a quiet area, and getting the same noises. This is telling me that it's this recorder. It's an internal fault, internal issues with this recorder. It's not ghosts at all. So anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope it wasn't too confusing or too techy. But there you go. I got nothing else to say about it. Really don't. So if you did enjoy this video, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you are interested in more work that I do, subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer. Check it out. It's a really good magazine. We put out a lot of good information. And with that, I'm going to stop talking, because I talk a lot, and move on to something else. So see you next time.